Florida Governor Ron DeSantis has portrayed himself as a political brawler, ready to fight anyone who stands in his way, from Disney and the corporate media to masked high school students. But for months, his ongoing conflict with Donald Trump was a one-sided one. This week, DeSantis entered the burgeoning rivalry for the first time in earnest, which brought about a change. DeSantis provoked the former president's legal issues in his public remarks and invited comparisons of their leadership and personalities. He doubled down by giving a lengthy interview to noted Trump supporter-turned-critic Piers Morgan, and he didn't fight back, as the British television host attacked the former president as dishonest and ferociously envious of his former allies' political success. When Trump tried to nickname them, the two people laughed. In a quote from the interview that appeared in the New York Post, DeSantis said, "You can call me whatever you want, as long as you also call me a winner." DeSantis has largely avoided discussing his plans for 2024, even as he moves toward what appears to be a presidential run. The apparent change in strategy coincides with the extraordinary legal issues surrounding Trump escalating recently, with the prospect of an indictment hanging over the former president and creating previously unheard of uncertainty in the upcoming GOP primary. It also comes after a coordinated effort over the weekend by Trump's allies to persuade potential Republican challengers to support the former president, as a Manhattan grand jury considers evidence pertaining to a hush money payment scheme to adult film star Stormy Daniels. Other Republican candidates for president defended Trump by accusing Manhattan District Attorney Alvin Bragg, a Democrat who was preparing to decide whether or not to indict Trump. In an interview with ABC News, former Vice President and potential candidate Mike Pence said, "It just feels like a politically charged prosecution here." Longshot candidate and businessman Vivek Ramaswamy called the grand jury investigation a textbook case of politicizing prosecutorial power. Nikki Haley, a former governor of South Carolina, added that it was more about retaliation than justice. However, DeSantis chose to poke the bear by saying to the crowd in Panama City, Florida, on Monday, that he has no idea what goes into paying hush money to a porn star to secure silence over some type of alleged affair. After Trump supporters vented in public on social media for several hours, DeSantis stuck by the joke in his interview with Morgan. He continued by praising his administration's strict management, pandemic response, and 19-point victory last fall, drawing comparisons to Trump's disorganized 4 years in office, which culminated in a defeat to Joe Biden. Just Morgan writing in the New York Post that the governor of Florida had finally taken the gloves off was enough for Trump and his allies to act accordingly. Jason Miller, a spokesperson and advisor to Trump, wrote on Twitter that DeSantis has finally shown his true colors. A never-Trump establishment supporter who hates the MAGA base and was lying the entire time. But DeSantis' criticism of Trump remained largely subtextual and implied an unusually reserved counterpunch for a politician who once dressed up as a Top Gun pilot to emphasize that he never backs down from a fight, and who concluded his re-election campaign by asserting that he was created by God to be a fighter. DeSantis generally rebuffed Morgan's repeated attempts to prod him into criticizing Trump. At one point, he likened the two men to Frankenstein and the monster from Frankenstein. Despite the fact that DeSantis and Trump seem to be headed in opposite directions, he said it is unlikely that will change. DeSantis declared, "If I were to run, I'd run against Biden. I understand that Trump and DeSantis may be vying for the Republican nomination, but in the end, you know the guy I'm going to focus on is Biden because I believe he has failed the nation. I believe that the nation desires change. We'll be very vocal about that because I believe they want a new beginning and a new course." Meanwhile, Trump has intensified his criticism of DeSantis in recent weeks, branding the governor and former ally as ungrateful, disloyal, and a mediocre politician, helped along by Florida's warm climate. Trump attacked DeSantis personally on Monday and elevated a picture he had previously shared on social media that suggested DeSantis had acted inappropriately with teenage girls while teaching history in Georgia in his early 20s. One of DeSantis' advisors told CNN, "It gets to the point where you're a candidate by default, and you have to engage. The governor cannot afford to be ignored right away." He calculated that it was time to push back, and it was obvious. As he gets closer to a run for the White House, DeSantis is shifting his criticism of Trump away from the current president and toward the former leader. He hasn't yet discussed any substantial policy differences between himself and his former ally, who will now be his rival. DeSantis has instead abandoned some long-held convictions in favor of embracing Trump's more populist inclinations. DeSantis, a former vocal supporter of arming Ukraine as a member of Congress, recently sided with Trump by referring to Russia's aggression in Eastern Europe as a territorial dispute. DeSantis told Morgan his words had been mischaracterized and clarified he thought Russia was wrong to invade after receiving a lot of backlash from his party. In a clear break from his days as a Tea Party Republican who supported privatizing Social Security and raising the retirement age to 70, he stated earlier this month, "We're not going to mess with Social Security as Republicans." Trump recently said that discussions about the federal budget shouldn't include entitlement programs. DeSantis has also modeled his potential candidacy on many of the most motivating tenets of Trump's first run for president, including immigration, criticizing the media, and raising concerns about the security of elections. DeSantis recently traveled to early nominating states. Trump's 2016 complaints about political correctness have had repercussions, as evidenced by his actions against what society has dubbed wokeness. According to DeSantis's advisors and supporters, the main obstacle for DeSantis is not differentiating himself from Trump on policy, but rather proving to Republican primary voters that he can carry out a platform more successfully. Trump, as some have suggested, without the baggage. In other words, whatever I want, he wants, as Trump recently stated. Trump and DeSantis are seen as politically aligned by many Republican primary voters, giving voters a choice that is more focused on electability than on policy differences. A recent CNN poll of likely GOP voters found that 36% would support DeSantis and 40% would support Trump. No other contender broke the double-digit mark. Chris Ager, the chairman of the New Hampshire Republican Party, recently told CNN that what the Republican voters are going to look at the end of the day is where is our best chance of winning, because both men resonate with Republican voters on policy. Who has the best chance of winning and enacting the policies again if they are both good? That will likely play a bigger role in many decisions, in my opinion.